It is Sunday, the 30th of March, 1952, around 4 in the morning in Athens, Greece. At an execution site not far from the center of the city, 4 men are facing a firing squad. They have refused to be blindfolded. It is still dark, so the Greek military police have lined up 17 cars with their engines running and the headlights on, shining on the men that are about to be killed. 24 rifles are aiming at them. The 4 men were accused of being communists and committing acts of espionage and treason. This would be a dark chapter in Greek history, but it would also be a dark one in American history. Because during the height of the Cold War, the US was determined to keep Greece on the right side of the Iron Curtain at any cost. The story I'm about to tell you takes us back to those years and to Greek and American secrets. It's a story about the complicated dance of dominance and submission that has gone on between the two countries for decades. But it's also a personal story about facing one's past after being forced to forget. And it begins with a road trip.
I had just graduated college, so this was in 2008, and I went on a little road trip across the country.
This is David Whelan. At the time our story begins, he's 21 years old, and he's going on a classic American road trip.
I drove across the country, going from New York, Boston, up to Detroit, Minneapolis, through the Badlands, across Salt Lake City. Eventually, I kind of went down the coast of California.
He ends up in San Francisco and decides to pay a visit to one of his cousins who was living there at the time.
We were having a really good time, and we were like drinking and had some pizza.
And after a few drinks, they start talking about more personal stuff.
We were talking about families or whatever, and he said, "Oh, you don't know?" So I tried to immediately minimize it, like, "Oh, no, I don't know what you're talking about." Of course, inside I'm thinking, what the heck is he talking about? And he's like, "Well, I don't really know. It's about your mom, and there was something about a gun."
It wasn't a gun. It was a firing squad. I know what happened to David's mom and to her entire family. You're listening to Born Greek, Made American, a podcast series about adoption, trauma, and politics. Episode 1, David, a shocking revelation. I'm Katerina Bakogianni. I'm a journalist based in Athens, Greece, and I have been obsessed with the story since I first heard it. In 1955, Joan Whelan, David's mom, was adopted by an American couple and taken from Greece to the United States. Only this isn't the story of a normal adoption. Joan and her sister were forcibly taken by Greek authorities and put into foster care. The Greek state arranged for them to be adopted by a very wealthy Greek-American couple in Massachusetts. You see, Joan was the daughter of one of the 4 communists I told you about earlier. Her father was executed by the Greek state. There's a black and white picture of Joan taken the day before she flies off to the US. She's sitting next to her adoptive father, who she has probably just met. It's her birthday. She's standing next to a table filled with food and drinks, and some people I can't make out. But there's one man I do recognize. I've seen him in other pictures from the same time. He wears a suit and tie, and he stands behind everyone else. He is a secret agent. Why was a secret agent in so many of their family photos? This is one of the many questions that spurred my investigation. To answer it, I have to go all the way back to the 1940s, to the very beginning of the Cold War. Tensions between the United States and the Soviet Union are at their peak as they struggle for control over neutral states. And both had their sights set on Greece. After World War II, Greece was the only Balkan state that had not gone communist. It was, as Americans put it, the last domino. A brutal civil war broke out between the established Greek state, backed by the US, and the Communist Party of Greece, backed by the Soviet Union. The Truman administration poured hundreds of millions of US dollars into Greece to make sure that it would remain in the camp of the West.
The very existence of the Greek state is today threatened by the terrorist activities of several thousand armed men, led by communists.
Financial aid poured in. The right-wing Greek state prevailed. But Greece was shattered. By the time the war ended in 1949, the Greek economy was in ruins, and the country was divided. Thousands of leftists and suspected communists were imprisoned, exiled, or killed. Meanwhile, the US economy was on track to recovery. 1950 marked the beginning of the decade of prosperity. It was an era called the Golden Age of Capitalism. Home ownership was a measure of success.
After a hard day's work, a man looks forward to a home he can be proud of.
Together with a happy family.
It's a time to settle down to the joys of family life, the quiet, intimate hours of the home, the children forever asking for just one more story.
With all of this economic prosperity, families grew. The birth rate in the US skyrocketed, and couples who couldn't have children of their own wanted to adopt. When we think of mass international adoptions, we tend to think of Asian children from countries like Korea, China, and Vietnam. But actually, the first country to engage in mass organized adoptions was Greece during this time period. Mass adoptions from Korea, for example, only started in 1953 after the end of the Korean War. But by then, hundreds of young Greek children had already made the trip to the east coast of America, traveling days and days on the Atlantic Sea. Were all these adoptions a measure of goodwill? Or were they a means of securing political power at the price of young children? When I first heard that thousands of babies had been adopted from my country and brought to America, I was shocked. How had this history been kept a secret for so long? I thought I'd call up a fellow journalist and a podcaster.
I'm Vanessa Grigoriadis, co-creator of the podcasts Chameleon and Fallen Angel.
You may know Vanessa Grigoriadis. She's co-founder of Campside Media. Chameleon just won Best Podcast of the Year in the Ambies, which is sort of like the Oscars, but for podcasts. Vanessa has also won numerous awards for her magazine writing. And her parents are both Greek-American. So she would know, wouldn't she?
So what can I tell you of my very scant Greek history and knowledge of Greek things?
Well, first of all, have you heard of the adoptions from Greece to the States? I mean, the story's breaking out in Greece now. We're only finding out now.
No, I haven't heard about this at all. I am surprised because it seems like something that should be, on everybody's lips. But no, I haven't heard about it.
Yeah, I mean, I was astounded that I hadn't heard about it either, having lived in both countries.
What is it about this story that resonates so much with you personally?
Well, first of all, how it's both an American story and a Greek story. Like, I grew up bilingual. I grew up having relatives from the US coming over to Greece all the time. But it was always very difficult for me to explain the history of the Civil War and how it still plays in Greek politics today and our relation to the US.
I can understand all of that. There are people in my family. My cousin, Marianne Apostolides, wrote a book called The Lucky Child, which is about her father and his experience during the Greek Civil War. And that is something that I grew up learning about, which was, her grandfather was a veterinarian who was executed. He was hung with a rope. And I've heard a lot about what happened during the Civil War. And I think that when you have atrocities happening, you never know if children can be involved. And it seems in this case they were.
Was he hung by the left?
He was hung by the left.
Yeah.
That's right.
Because there were atrocities on both sides. So the history resonates with me. And also the fact that it affects people's lives today, like David. I just think it's a story worth telling.
Yeah, absolutely. It seems to me to be the worst atrocity that could be committed, to take somebody's baby and ship that baby halfway across the world so that the baby has no connection with his or her home.
So I think I'm coming over to do the story with David.
Amazing. I am very excited for this. I mean, I think that you have an opportunity to really speak to both cultures, to speak to the American culture and have them understand something about modern Greek history, and then also to speak to Greeks and make them understand what the dynamic is in the U.S. at this point.
So this is how I ended up on the very cold January morning in the U.S., in Brooklyn, outside David's home. David?
Hi, come right up.
Thank you.
Hi.
Hi.
Katrina?
Yeah.
Welcome. How are
Hi,
you?
good to see you.
Come on in.
Hi.
How was your flight?
It was good, actually.
Yeah?
Yes. David and I had been in contact for months. But before now, I had no idea what he looked like. He's not on social media. You could say he's kind of a private person. So my first impression? I thought I was looking at a young Greek Orthodox priest dressed in clothes from the Gap. He has a fashionably long beard and rimmed eyeglasses. A lot has happened since 2008, when his cousin told him that something had happened to his mom involving a gun. David has since graduated from Yale with a Master of Fine Arts degree in painting and printmaking. At Yale, he became familiar with the literature about trauma and memory and how it influences not only those that experience it directly, but also their children.
This was my mother's trauma. This was historic trauma. This was anywhere but me. But yeah, I was clearly traumatized from a difficult relationship and the shock of these things. And I'm still working through that.
David sat down with me in his small living room filled with paintings, some his own. And he began to talk about his childhood. He was a quiet kid, not part of a big group of friends. He was more comfortable at home with his mom, who was loving, but distant. She was on medication for depression and occasionally had to be hospitalized.
When I think of feeling affection from my parents, it was from my father. He was the one that read me stories at night.
But sometimes his dad couldn't be there.
He would go to Bruins games, the Boston hockey team, and so it was up to my mom to read to me at night. So she would read like a couple sentences. I'd be like, no, Mom, it's kind of a thing we do here. I have to fall asleep. And this is enough. And she would go, I'd be wide awake. I'd think, man, she does not know how to do this.
So,
my dad.
Initially, David was not surprised that there was a family secret.
I knew nothing. I knew that she was from Greece. I knew that she was adopted. And I knew that her parents, had a tragic end, but it was something like, it was a sad thing and we don't talk about it. They drove off a cliff or something.
David had a few theories.
Was it something that she experienced in America? Did she experience a trauma in college? Was there sexual violence?
It may seem strange that David never asked his mom directly. At least it seems strange to me. He says asking his mom was out of the question. Growing up with Joan was like walking on eggshells. But after reading about trauma at Yale, things changed. He started to feel some kind of urgency to act.
It wasn't just like a family secret. It was like this could be a key to helping my mom. Because it was always the context of like, what's wrong with mom? Why is she the way she is? And then if I can figure that out, then maybe I can do something to help her.
David turned to the only person he could ask, his dad. It was like pulling a tapeworm out of a person's body.
I then started a campaign of very slowly, I can't overemphasize this, extremely slowly asking my father what happened. My mom, she was on lithium and she was in a very medicated state. And so she would go to bed after we watched some television, let's say at 10 o'clock, 9, 10 o'clock, she'd go to bed. And so when she would go to sleep, it was just my dad and I. I don't know how it started, but I eventually said to him, listen, given everything that's happened to mom and the mental illness and her pain and all this craziness, do you have any idea, like, did anything happen to her? And you could tell my dad's like an awful liar. He's just, like, he just kind of got a little stiff, you know, I'm not quite sure, you know, okay.
David did not get the answers he wanted that day, but he persisted. Week after week, he would come back home from graduate school to be with his parents. After Joan went to bed, David and his dad would watch television in the family den on a couple of lazy boys. Most of the time, with a Pinot Grigio in hand. The den was decorated in a Casablanca theme, with a straw ceiling and a kind of linen wallpaper and things his parents had bought on the honeymoon. A lantern from Turkey, some Persian rugs. Every week, in the same room, David would ask,
Dad, remember when I asked you, do you think of anything else, about that time? Did mom ever mention anything? It's so strange that she didn't say anything to you, And he would say, well, yeah, she just didn't really talk to me much about her past, and that was it. That's how we left it. So this was a very long process, but eventually, and I make this joke that, the Pinot Grigio might have helped a little bit. Eventually he's like, listen, something did happen to your mom, all right? And it was tragic, but she didn't talk to me about the details, okay? He was kind of like, all right, and I don't know if I can say any more than that.
Another couple of weeks went by. Then David brought the subject up again. This time, his dad was ready with an answer.
I talked to your mom, and she said, I can't tell you. And it was just the name of her father.
The name of Joan's father is Elias Argyriadis, which in Greek means made of silver.
I think it was the death certificate, and he said, she still hasn't told me what happened, but here are the documents. Here's the names of her parents. And that was the extent of it.
David Googled his name. That same night, he didn't have a computer at his parents' house, so he used his father's.
I went into his office, which was in the attic of our house, and turned on his computer and typed in Agriadis, and, I thought, oh my God, what happened here? It was just this unbelievable discovery.
This is what David found. On Sunday, the 30th of March, 1952, the bullets of the firing squad put an end to the lives of 4 communist men. One was Nikos Belogiannis. Belogiannis is a household name in Greece. He is the most famous Greek communist. His execution by the Greek state sparked tremendous public outcry, not just in Greece, but around the world. There is a sketch by Pablo Picasso of Belogiannis holding a red carnation, a flower which became symbolic of communism. The three comrades who were executed beside him were Dimitris Batsis, Nikos Kaloumenos, and a name David now recognized, Ilias Argyriadis.
I was like, whoa, okay, so... All right, so my grandfather was a part of something else. It wasn't just was shot in the street or something. There was a political context here. And that's when I saw his picture of him on the page. And, it's that classic moment when you realize, whoa, that looks just like my mom. That is strange.
But how was it that the daughter of an executed Greek communist ended up the adopted child of a wealthy American couple? The next chapter was about to begin. David cast his net really wide. He basically emailed every professor of modern Greek history in existence asking for information about his grandfather.
The question was, hi, I just discovered my grandfather is this person and was involved in the life and the execution of this other guy, Benonianis, and, can you help me learn more about this time?
You have to understand, all this is basic information for anyone who knows anything about Greek history. So David got a lot of links to articles from people in various universities around the globe. But there was one professor who was very interested in David's discovery. She was on another continent from David, in England, and she had been studying Greece since she fell in love with ancient Greek in high school.
My name is Gonda van Steen, and I'm the Corais Professor of Modern Greek and Byzantine History, Language and Literature at King's College London. And I am stunned because I had never heard of the adoption history of Greece. Even though I'd been doing modern Greek history for a long time, I had never heard of this.
Let me tell you a few things about Honda. She's a very famous Belgian-American classical scholar. And I don't mean just among her peers famous. Honda has made it to the Lego Hall of Fame in a series called The Lego Classicists that honors people who have made a mark in the field. In 2019, Honda wrote a book called Adoption, Memory, and Cold War Greece, Quid Pro Quo. Honda is the first to research how thousands of Greek children were pushed into American adoptions back at the time when David's mother was a child. Here she is speaking at an event organized at the American School for Classical Studies at Athens.
So as much as Greece may want to send children, that is not possible unless the US opens its doors, because US immigration is nothing to mess with. And certainly not in the 1950s, when US immigration was very, very much on the lookout for communist sympathizers. And there was a fierce anti-communism in the US happening.
So Honda is the expert on the matter. And when David reached out to her and asked her about how his mother Joan ended up in the United States after her father was executed by the Greek state, Honda took it personally.
And then to come upon a family that was no longer allowed to exist as a Greek family, with the members that were left of it, but had to be disrupted even more by way of adoptions, that just got under my skin, and I felt I had to do something.
Honda and David started emailing back and forth.
Dear Dr. Van Steen, my mother was born in the mountainous terrain of northern Greece, and she and her younger sister came to the States in 1955 as orphans adopted by a Greek-American family. That her father was Ilias Argyriadis, who was captured and executed by the Greek government for being a communist.
Dear David, thank you for contacting me. I'm intrigued by your story, which opens up a black page from Greece's mid-20th century history. I'd love to learn more and may be able to answer a few of your most urgent questions. The context to your mother's adoption will be key here. Please do ask your mother if her father left a diary, letters, etc.
Gonda, Regretfully, retrieving information from my mother about her father or Greece in general is difficult. She was severely traumatized from her early childhood.
Dear David, I found something that you can make sense of. It essentially says that Effie Argyriadi lost her sisters when they were adopted secretly and illegally by a Greek American.
Gonda, my aunt mentioned to me that someone from Greece tried to contact her in the 1980s, claiming that he or she was a forgotten brother or sister. I forget the gender of the inquirer. Could there be another sibling?
Dear David, now you got me really puzzled. And that is a good thing. You have to tell me how much you can handle, and then you decide how much your mother can handle. Let me know what the next step is.
Gonda, it's good to share this thinking with you. Please do tell me what more you find out.
Dear David, turns out you have not only an aunt, Effie, but also a first cousin. Your mother is mentioned on the web, and so is your youngest aunt in this rather sharp statement. The other two daughters of Ilias Argyriadis, the Greek state took care to send them to America through the shameless business of the adoptions, to protect them from the virus of communism. You may recall that in the aftermath of the Greek Civil War, from 1946 through 1949, and at the onset of the Cold War, there was plenty of paranoia about communists and crypto-communists. But I can explain those matters another time. For now, this tells me that Effie must have been older, and perhaps even by several years. Key question is now whether your mother remembers her older sister Effie, and most of all, whether she is ready for the question. I hope I haven't overwhelmed you with too much information. Keep me posted.
This is where David's personal journey begins. He now knows that there's some mystery surrounding the adoption of his mother Joan and of her younger sister. He also knows that there's another sister, Effie, who is still in Greece and believes that Joan's adoption was illegal. And he has to decide what to do about it, because time was running out for Joan. Her mental health was getting worse.
The clock was ticking because, my mom wasn't well. And now that I'm finding out that there's maybe a key, it was like this could be a key to helping my mom.
In the next episode, I meet a CIA agent in Washington, D.C.
It sounds awful to say it, and I'm glad that I won't be quoted by name to say this, but at the time, the Greek government did exactly as Washington told it to do.
And I go to meet Effie, Joan's sister in Greece. It turns out she has been looking for Joan her whole life.
I had no idea where they were. It was like they had vanished.
Born Greek, Made American is a co-production of Melon Media and the non-for-profit journalistic organization IMED. It is created and hosted by me, Katerina Bakogianni. Additional reporting and fact-checking from Dimitris Manis. Editing, mixing and sound design by Evangelos Makris and Dimitris Kokovidis. Our theme music is composed by Evangelos Makris. Executive producers were Nikos Aronis and Panayotis Menegos for IMED, and me for Melon Media. A big thank you to Campsite Media's Vanessa Grigoriadis for her support to the series from the very beginning. And special thanks to Honda van Steen. Born Greek is based on her book, Adoption, Memory and Cold War Greece, Quid Pro Quo, and it could not have happened without her.